Greetings and welcome back to another discussion. Today I am joined by my friend and legendary Dutchman, Dom. We're going to be talking about, I guess, what might be called the pros and cons of relationships. Now, within the manosphere, specifically within the circles of certain people going their own way, relationships can be hit or miss in the sense that some people think they're universally to be shunned, and other people think it's perfectly fine. And I want to give it my best go today in discussion with my friend, talking about what are the potential pros, not marriage, mind you, but relationships, and what are the potential cons. So let me welcome my favorite Dutchman back on. I've had him on a few times.
Well, hello, and thank you for having me, although it's a very strange subject for me. Oh, probably not the most knowledgeable person, at least from experience, but thanks for having me anyway.
Well, I think that, Dom, that puts you in almost a unique position,
Mm.
because when you're looking at relationships, you could say you're a bit of an outsider, but you also have a perspective that other people don't necessarily have. So in assessing whether or not you personally would ever want a relationship or engage in that sort of thing, on the one hand, sure, there's a lack of experience, but on the other hand, you can also look at other people and get an idea of what's going on in their lives. I mean, you've seen people in relationships, and you've seen sometimes how dysfunctional they can be, stressful, etc., and that can give you information. It's almost like vicariously you're maybe not living through a relationship, but you're getting information relayed to you from these other people. And
Yeah, sorry, yeah, go on.
no, I just finish up. Yeah, and that's I think that's a critical perspective to look at, because it's a given in our society pretty much that everyone is supposed to pursue relationships. Everyone's supposed to go after this thing. But maybe if you look at the landscape and you have a perspective and you've informed yourself based off of other people, maybe you won't necessarily have that ambition. Maybe you think it's a better deal not to pursue them. Now, I do plan on offering a devil's advocate argument for the pros of relationships, but I'd like to hear what you have to say first. So.
Yeah, I suppose my experience is largely from observing family initially. I've got a very large family. I think 28 cousins. So I've seen, well, probably things that are discussed on channels like yours, and Spade, as in like divorce, how the balance between what men and women, how they interact. I've got like two or three uncles who've always told me, never get married, never get married, never get married, and lo and behold, well, I didn't get married. I also don't have had a lot of relationships, and not very long ones either. I think the longest one was about 3 months at that. And next to that, I've developed subconsciously sort of a personality that's apprehensive of getting too close to people. My parents are divorced. I had a pretty rough upbringing, and at that point, you sort of keep things at arm's length. You don't want to get too involved because you always tally things up in other ways that you could get hurt. I'm not saying that's a very healthy or very good thing to have, but it's in hindsight, yeah, it does protect you from certain damages that
It's
can
logical.
happen.
I mean, if you've had I'm not saying you, but one has had many negative experiences throughout one's life, it's normal to be, say in that case, a bit more neurotic, a bit more apprehensive. It's
Mm.
like, you're looking at the posts box and you're just assuming if there's mail in there, it's probably going to be negative. And sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, but because you're in a state of preparedness. And I'm not saying that is a perfect analogy, but if you spent most of your life observing the dysfunctionality of so-called relationships and certainly marriage, it's simply logical that one would develop, I wouldn't say protective gear, but a perspective that is as you put it, apprehensive or at least cautious, considering that sort of thing. I I guess I would say, and you know how much I admire you for your ability to actually.
Emotionally dead.
Well, I we'll put it this way: it took me years to become emotionally dead, but you you just had a far better start than I ever did, and I just I wish I could have had that too. But yeah, I guess that's one way of putting it. Yeah, no, sure there were, my parents are still together, whatever, not divorced, but just some dysfunction, and there were problems, but I never, as I don't have nearly as massive a family as you have, there were never these indications to me. So I just kind of, and of course I'm somewhat older, so I followed a different path. There wasn't enough, or there wasn't really any information at the time, so I went down the conventional path of things, and it took me a long time to realize that maybe it's not all it's cracked up to be. It's
Mm.
something that people just don't think about, obviously, and it goes without saying that on this channel for many years we've talked about similar subjects, but it's just a given. It's like getting up in the morning, taking a shower. Well, I guess not everyone does that, but most people do. Or having breakfast or something. So you just do it. You go through the motions. It's never questioned. But I think what's unique, or reasonably unique in your situation, is that even before getting to know you, what seems to be many years ago now, you had these experiences, and they kind of set, I don't like the term emotionally dead, but they've created sorry?
Distant.
Distant,
Emotionally
yeah.
distant.
I mean, yeah, that's for sure. But I think, honestly, I think emotional distance, it's a strength of yours. It would only, and think about it, in your own case, the only case where emotional distances could be a quote unquote liability would be in some relationship with a woman who would then complain about you being emotionally distant. I've never complained about it, as you know, and it's never been a factor to me. But ultimately, it's a strength because you don't let things get to you, and you're able to push through. I don't think I've known anyone with, we all fail at things, yourself included, but with your tenacity to keep on persevering and pushing through. And when I think about that and think about the context of your personality and character, and I'll say publicly that I admire both a great deal, I don't see how a relationship would really benefit you and your goals. I mean, sure, to become quote unquote less emotionally distant, but what does that achieve? If anything, it would make you more vulnerable to the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune generally, and it doesn't seem to be any real benefit. I mean, I've over time developed a certain degree of emotional distance, but that was something that's occurred as a consequence of many, many years of experiences, both with males and females. I mean, in terms of friendship and just interaction more broadly. And so it took a long time. But if I'd had that mentality going way back, I think I think things might have turned out overall better for me. Impossible to say 100%.
Well, the emotional distance does have its benefits, and I think somewhat right in regards to relationships. But emotional connection to other people isn't just with whoever you're in a relationship with, but there can also be with men, with family, or well, if you have them girlfriends, not as in wife girlfriend, but just a girlfriend. So there is, and there's just me also playing devil's advocate here. There is something to be said for that. Um, I have to admit that sometimes it feels like you're inside of a bubble. People just won't either can't understand you, don't hear you, etc., etc. It's not always like I've always been sort of stuck in one foot in one world, the other foot in another world. So it's not that I don't get around, but sometimes it'd be nice to uh, have some sort of connection, something like you and I have now. Sometimes we're on the same server and we don't say a whole lot over a given course of 20 minutes, and perhaps in the next 20 minutes we'll discuss a game. but I wouldn't forsake somebody's emotional maturity or just so you don't get hurt or so you can.
Well, I think in the cases you've mentioned, and I don't want to. One of my criticisms of your social environment has always been that most of the people have always taken you for granted.
Mm,
You know, you're very talented, and in some ways, you're the kind of the useful guy, not idiot by any means, but you can do so many things practically. I mean, by the way, this guy can build anything, put anything together. He taught me how to put a PC together, well, sort of, since I still suck at it. But anyway, so a lot of people take advantage of you and don't really see your humanity beneath that,
mm.
and that's something that I've always striven to show you. But yeah, I mean that I'm not so sure if that's a consequence. Look, the way I look at that, I guess it's more adjacent to the topic than anything else, is
Yeah.
that these are just the wrong people. And even if it's a majority of people, it says more about the state of society and your social environment than anything else.
Correct. And as you just mentioned, the whole doing, yeah, I'm good at doing. I'm for the most part a doer. There's some sort of grace in not being a human doing for most of the people around you, and just, for lack of a better word, rubbing in their face that you're a human. Um, at that point, you very quickly notice who are the people who are worth keeping around and who are just people.
Yeah, and that's I think when you become known in your circles as well the human doing, there people tend to take advantage of that,
Mm,
and even when you've helped me with various activities that I kind of either suck at or have no background in, I've always compensated you a way of showing that I value. I don't just see you as doing something, whatever. Even though you're a close friend and I do love you, I still think it's important
oh,
that somebody recognize that this is not something to be taken for granted. And a shorthand way of doing that is paying you essentially a salary for something.
mm,
That should, just because that's the problem, in broadly human relationships. You've been around people for a very, very long time, and you're the guy. I mean, even your mother views you as a utility for the most part,
yeah.
unfortunately. That husbandification, as Barbarossa used to call it, you know, the only way to break that pattern is to show some indication of something that's different. And I personally, when I think, I guess that's always the question when it comes to relationships with women. The idea that you might be sort of missing out on something because of your, as you put it, emotional distance. I'm not so sure because let's be honest, how many women out there are going to look at you, given your handiness, for lack of a better term, and see anything beyond that or value beyond that, say in your character, um, and try to dig more deeply because admittedly that's tough with you, right? You got to dig beneath the surface to get at your core, and not many people can do that.
True. But I also think it's partly one's own responsibility. If all you show is that you're good at doing things, then that's all people will see. You take that away, then they'll be forced to look at other things, what's underneath. Um, Again, if you're good at doing things and you want to be in a relationship, but you're not about that life of, you know, fixing things up, then from the get-go, and this is just a theory crafting on my part, from the get-go you'd have to say, well, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm taking charge of the relationship, if you want that, if that's what you are about, and yeah, sort of put very clear borders and work with that. And if then the person in question, the girl, the woman, doesn't like that, well, pick up your ball and go play elsewhere.
Right. I mean that in theory that would give you almost an advantage in most relationships because your emotional distance, I guess you could say relative indifference. I mean, you kind of like doing things your own way. You like having your freedom.
Yeah,
I mean, you ride a
I know.
motorcycle, right? I think that's also, when I think about pros and cons, just in general of human relationships, there's always that conflict for me between freedom, the ability to do what you want, and obligations and other things weighing down on you. Because, in some sense, obligations are important. If you don't have any obligations or responsibilities, sometimes life can become pretty meaningless. I mean, what keeps me most tethered to life are my, I guess, obligations, responsibilities, to people like you and some others. But there's always that conflict. I mean, we have a common friend who is in a relationship, and he likes well enough the woman or the girl or whatever he's together with. In fact, likes her quite a bit, and on many issues they seem to get along. But there are occasional, as I put in my recent talk, lycanthropic transformations that she undergoes. And more importantly, there's always that push and pull of the sense of freedom that he wants. I think oftentimes in relationships, that's the primary issue for men. They want to do what they want to do, but there are natural limitations, and wholesale just, I guess, abandoning the relationship is not necessarily an option if they want to stay in it. And also that sense of responsibility, pulling them back when they want to do what it is they want to do. And I think when I think of the cons of relationships, and more generally human relations, is that the thought process of, will I lose my freedom and my ability to just be me and do what I want to do? After having experiences and what have you, this seems to me to be a huge factor for a lot of guys. I know that's a big factor for you too. I mean, you like to do what you want to do. You're not, I mean, yes, you've had many people put impositions on you, family members and other people that take you for granted. And maybe especially because of that, you want to do what you want to do on your own terms. And I'm, albeit for somewhat different reasons, because I'm utterly useless compared to you. I want to do things on my own terms too. And I think our common friend is quite similar in that regard. And in his relationship, there's naturally that conflict between him doing what he wants to do and his girlfriend essentially not necessarily preventing him, but adding new layers of unnecessary complexity to his daily routine or just how he interacts with people, things he never, thinks about really. So, for example, we have that remarkable talent of sitting in silence with each other for quite some time and then talking about something. This, with our common friend, seems to be quite difficult to achieve with his girlfriend. There always needs to be, well, maybe not always, but some sort of conversation. If there's not, there's something wrong. And he, over the years, had gotten used to a lifestyle where that, too, would be the way we go about things, the sort of normal way of going about things, not really a big deal. And sure, we can talk for a really long time or we can't. Or we don't, rather, and it doesn't really make a difference one way or another. It's not going to sort of dissolve the bonds of friendship or the relationship between us.
Yeah.
But I noticed that in this common friend, this constant, push and pull, the tug of war between freedom. And I don't even think his girlfriend is malicious necessarily. I don't even think that, far from it. I think she's actually overall a decent person. But there's inevitably that conflict and misunderstanding. And I think, to me, that's the biggest con. If I wanted to play devil's advocate and say what the pros could be, I suppose if you're really desperate for companionship. I mean, but this is such a complicated topic because, I get that a lot of people who have either never had experiences or not many, they want that, I guess, specifically female companionship. But I don't think they realize that it comes with a lot of stress and heartache. So whenever I, in my own context, in my own life, think about female companionship specifically, I do admittedly associate it with stress and headaches more than anything else. I don't think of any of the benefits. I certainly think sex is overrated. And yeah, it's just not. Whereas other people who maybe don't have the experience or have had different experiences. Look, I'm not going to lie. Many, perhaps even most of my experiences in relationships have been negative, more negative than positive at least. And that obviously colors your worldview and how you look at things.
Of course, I mean, that's how humans operate. You look for a pattern, and now you have a pattern. There's an outcome, so if you want to avoid the outcome, you avoid that specific pattern. Um, I mean, if I had to give a pro, because you asked me for this talk about a week ago, women are sort of the keepers of social. I don't want to say cohesion, but contacts, right? If you're with a woman, you're also with a friend, with a family, etc., etc. That may not be a terrible thing. Now, I'm partly speaking from my own experience here, but let's say you have a young man who isn't quite emotionally evolved. He's not quite matured. Maybe he's had a rough life. Maybe not. Whatever the reason may be, being in those social situations may be beneficial because you recognize what is good for yourself, right? But what makes you feel good. But how do other people respond to this? How you recognize patterns in human behavior.
Yeah.
Plus, perchance, depending on how she's connected to, you may get some new friends, etc., etc. You do sometimes read these things if you go on Reddit and have a look at the relationship sub. I'm not sure, however, whether there's obviously, yeah, as you mentioned, there's the sex, but and then getting back to your earlier point, I'm stubborn, I'm rebellious, and all that. I do what I want to do. And indeed, then having to sort of tally up the stress of also having to take care, like genuinely take care of somebody else, given that chance, I'm not sure whether that's worth it, because there's expectations on you. If normally there's expectations from, say, work, obviously I want to meet those expectations. I want to make sure that the work I deliver is of good quality. And that carries over into a relationship. I'm pretty responsibility. I've got 25 hours worth of responsibility in a day of only 24 hours, so that's also a consideration. I'm not sure whether the pro of then developing your emotional and social skills, even if they can be very good for you. Whether that is outweighed by it, because I think you can get them elsewhere. Join a club, learn, get a hobby, go play Warhammer tabletop, go practice boxing, judo, go ride a motorcycle with your friends. Those are also all activities that are more or less, without stress and still may have some benefits for your emotional and social well-being. There's the sex, but nowadays, there's Tinder, there's friends with benefits
There are
situation.
other options if you really want that.
Yeah,
And if you don't have the long-term goal of getting married and having children,
I don't. So
yeah. Although, I mean, it's kind of funny because you used to have that. What is it? 25 kids in a barn. Was that it?
no, not quite 6. Only
All
6,
right.
and sort of like a large farmhouse, land house,
Yeah.
lots of green space and a shed to tinker around in.
Yeah. That was a
I
long
was
time ago.
I was 18. You'll have to forgive me.
Yeah. No. Nothing to be forgiven.
Mm.
Yeah. I think that it doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, my view of males and females is that they're, two separate reproductive units that do require each other to reproduce, obviously. And there's going to be a lot of conflict and quote unquote compromise involved. If you don't have the intention of reproducing, then the actual point of engaging with a woman doesn't seem terribly salient to me because, I mean, that's the whole point. Couples tend to come together typically to form quote unquote long-term bonds so they can reproduce and have children, and that's it. But
There are peripheral benefits,
sure,
but
sure.
yeah, but and this was something I personally did was well, what are those peripheral benefits? Can I get them elsewhere? And yeah, for a part you can. I have a lot of friends. Well, maybe I should then invest more in social relationships.
Yeah,
Get the
I mean
benefits
that's
from that.
yeah. Although I suppose that advocates for quote unquote romantic relationships would argue it's not the same thing, and I suppose it's not. Nothing is perfectly identical, but at the same time, what is if something like that more or less fulfills what you're looking to get out of it, then I don't really see the problem in that.
Even if it doesn't, even if a friendship doesn't quite live up to it, sooner or later you'll find out, and you
Hmm.
know what you're missing is then continue searching for.
Yeah, yeah. There's that boundless optimism of yours in contrast to me.
I can only ever move forward. I don't know how to do else.
Yeah, well, I know, but you have that. Uh, you're like a bulldozer, a human bulldozer. Obstacles are just swept aside, bulldozed away.
Yeah, guidelines, yeah.
Yeah, I yeah, and so it's hard for me not being in that mentality of really wanting companionship to relate to what the pros would be, if only again tainted by my own negative experiences. I didn't have largely positive experiences. A
Mm.
lot of misunderstandings, a lot of just incompatibilities, a lot of take your pick. And I vastly prefer my life not being in a relationship to being in one. Because even if I imagine, so this common friend of ours again, I think overall, he's a good match with his girlfriend, and they certainly understand each other pretty well, and there are some common interests, but there's still that typical tension between male, female, and there are these transformations that take place in her at times, and you can just you can tell where when he's reaching his limit, he's really stressed out, and one has to wonder in a context like that is that's as close as you might come to some sort of quote unquote harmony and getting along, but at the same time, there's still conflicts unnecessary conflicts, mind you,
Mm.
from a male perspective that would make me fear that sort of thing, or not fear, but just not want to deal with it, because as good as it can be, it still seems like the solo life is ultimately better on balance, at least. And I think this is just not. This is I think the really big issue ultimately is that very few people take the time to think about what are these pros and cons, and is it even worth pursuing? Again, when I was growing up, it was just a given. You were just supposed to pursue it. Sure, there's an instinctual level to it. There's a biological level to it. But you didn't question it. You just did it. And so I did my homework. I went through my experiences. You, in many ways, were spared a lot of those experiences. I think
Mm.
ultimately to your benefit, which turned you into the lean, mean bulldozing machine you are now. But I don't know. I can't really think of the benefits, because I always look at every relationship potential or possibility as a really as a potential for stress, additional stress that I don't need. You know,
I do wonder. I mean, we have the acronym "All women are like that." Our world.
right.
Is it on a spectrum?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Do
absolutely. I've never, I've always thought everything's on a gradient or on
yeah.
a spectrum. So sure, some women are going to be, I guess, more like this prototypical or stereotypical picture we might have, and others less so. But ultimately, I when I think about any potential relationship, I just think of the stress involved, and ultimately, when I contrast it with my current life or the life I had lived, and is it actually yielding more benefits? Um, my standard is the standard of nothing. I told this to an ex once. Don't worry. I'm not going to cheat or anything, but your competition is nothing. If you're not better as a person in my life than not having you in it at all, then there's no point. And I think I've continued to this day to use that measurement to just look at relationships broadly, and I just don't see the benefit in that light.
So this is more, well, again, of a devil's advocate thing then. With that approach to a relationship, isn't there some degree of self-fulfilling prophecy?
Sure, sure, but I mean, but
No, no,
part,
this is my opinion speaking, but
yeah,
if I'm going to go in, I mean, I might as well go all. If the chance of is there of getting hurt, then so be it. I'll know I'll get over it. I know I've got the tools or where and how. Um, but if I'm going to start, I might as well just.
it's not about getting hurt. At least not for me. I think I'm almost as emotionally dead as you are. Maybe I'm even more. I've had more years on this earth, so I'm behind you, but I'm catching up. I'm going to beat you at this. I guarantee. But
Have it all yours.
yes, thank you. No, it's really it is for me just well stress. I mean, because I have various health problems and stuff like that. Going all in is fine. I don't really care one way or another about the sort of being hurt factor. Maybe I did 20, 15 years ago, but it's much more about, is this going to add new layers of stress? Is this going to make my life any more difficult? Now, you could argue that challenge is an important thing, but if I really want to challenge myself, maybe I should start doing hill sprints. Given the weather these days, that's not going to happen. I despise the summer, but still, there or whatever. I mean, this sounds like a useless example, but historically, I've never played FPS games. There were a few exceptions. There was Ghost Recon Phantoms, which is a really good, underrated game by Ubisoft, made by Ubisoft Singapore, I believe. Died out, small player base, but I had a lot of fun with that. And for some time, I did play Overwatch, and that's training a skill set I had never trained before because historically I've played mostly RPGs and similar things where these types of skills, reflexes, where that's a different kind of challenge, sure, and that can be stressful, but to me, there are certain universals in human behavior, both male and female behavior, and I just recognize the patterns. That's not a new type of stress that you can use to your advantage. So, for example, again, petty example, most people wouldn't care, but am I a better FPS player than I was 10 years ago, despite my advanced age? Yeah, I definitely think so. I don't play competitive anymore, but given my age and lack of experience, I managed to climb to low grandmaster when I was still active and competitive, right? And that's no small feat considering I don't have the background, my age, and all these other things. So that was a stressor rather, but ultimately fueled something, or which is the mod that I off and on been working on, put on hold now because of a lot of IRL nonsense. That was really stressful learning that stuff. Very frustrating at times, not seeing patterns. And then overall, over time, getting the hang of that. A stress that yields some kind of benefit. And I think that's really the critical difference. We talk about stress in the context of relationships. It it's almost always something you just want to escape from. And it usually is about something petty or nonsensical or something that isn't going to advance yourself as a person, improve some skill set, or improve you in any way. I suppose there might be some version of that that would improve you, but generally speaking, I don't have a problem taking on challenges if I feel up to it. Uh, but
Do
it,
you think that the stress instigated in a relation, whether that's a component of human behavior, female human behavior, or do you think that there's something else? And what I'm pointing towards is that there's well, emotional or behavioral immaturity, which is amplified by this halo effect that women have. They can get away with a lot of things and have no need to know have a good hard look at themselves, at their behavior. Not talking about all women, but just a theoretical example.
yeah. Well, that's an interesting concept. I mean, halo effect broadly is usually applies to sort of pretty people, but yeah, you could say that there's a type of halo effect that surrounds women that
Mm.
allows them oftentimes to get away with outrageous things, sometimes even certain types of crimes, without going into detail, given YouTube policies. Um, so, sure, I think that's part of it, but I just think that men and women, quote unquote, naturally belong together because they need each other to reproduce, but because of these different directions they've gone in throughout evolution, sexual dimorphism being a strong factor in many levels, both psychological and physiological, that certain types of conflict are inevitable. You also get conflict with males, but it's much more predictable. And certainly in reliable male friendships, this sort of thing, the kinds of petty conflicts that you see in that you can observe in, say, your friends' relationships or whatever, you just don't really find them.
Mm.
And I think that, again, that's worth bearing and dealing with if you have the goal of having a family and children. In fact, in those cases, you're going to have to bite the bullet and accept that some level of conflict and stress that you don't view as productive stress, because there's good stress and negative stress, and there's also extended stress where you're always, that nobody can withstand that over time. We weren't built that way.
No.
It's like it's basically the modern world in many ways. These sort of constant stressors being thrown at you. Well, then, if you'll have to put up with that. But if you don't have those goals, it doesn't make much sense to me to expose yourself to that, because there's very little to be gained. Yeah, there's no, I could say I'm a better modder of, in this case, Pillars of Eternity 2 than I was at the beginning. Now, of course, nobody gives a shit about the game, or nobody, whatever, but it's something I wanted to do, and it was stressful, and it's over time become less stressful. Same with FPS shooters to some degree. Even though I'll never be incredibly talented one way or another, it's just you can improve yourself. And maybe I will, when the weather cools off, if I feel up to it, start doing regular hill sprints, something like that. These are all stressors, but I'm going to get something out of it. Whereas with the stress that you encounter in relationships between men and women, it really is just a stress you want to diffuse because there's no benefit. You just want to essentially diffuse the situation. It's explosive or whatever. She's not listening, what have you. So I can't understand. And yeah, sure, my biases, because I honestly view relationships primarily between men and women as sources of stress and not positive stress. So essentially negative stress that does not promote, I hate the term personal growth. It's so, it's
New age?
It's not even new age. It's just overused and really trite. But
Mm.
that doesn't promote or lend itself to your ability to learn new things, do new things that you might feel some sense of accomplishment. It's just so. But sure, if somebody hasn't had those experiences, I'll concede. I'm sure. Well, I know there are guys who have had quote unquote good experiences with females. I'm not sure how they measure that, But in those cases, maybe they weren't that stressful, or for whatever reason, the stress doesn't affect them as much. Yeah, I'm pretty stress sensitive because obviously, the more stress I have, the worse my sleep. Basically, it creates a health spiral downwards. So yeah, I mean, we're all colored by our individual experiences. But to me, given my experiences, and I have to say, experiences of other men I've known, they're that's basically what they relationships do. They produce stress. They drain you of money as well. You simply cannot have a relationship without spending money you otherwise would not be spending, and it might be very little, but even so.
Again, then, devil's advocate.
Hmm.
Sometimes when you go through comment sections, not well, not yours so much. You don't have quite that specific audience, but in a similar sphere, um, I see certain groups of men being very, very angry at the current state of affairs,
Hmm.
understandably perhaps. But the solution then revolves around a very, very traditional setup, not just a man-woman, but the way states should be ran, etc., etc. Again, I'm not going to judge. That's not my place. But what I do see is a whole lot of anger. Anger has its use, has its place. Now and then, it works like flint and tinder to get a fire going. But somewhere it needs to stop. I wonder whether that anger and resulting stress outweighs the stress of a relationship for some men.
I'm not sure. I'm not a very angry guy, so it's hard for me to relate.
Mm.
Well, I think the thing about anger is there's a term for it. So the audience knows there's certain terms I'll have to avoid in the future. We'll call it a crimson-hued capsule rage or anger. Crimson-hued capsule rage or anger. Right. That is very animating, and it gives you energy, and you feel energized to do things and empowered to do things. I'm not really sure. I don't really know. I don't see much value in lamenting a past that doesn't exist anymore. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't even, I typically don't spend any time thinking about some past that would have been different, because it's just, that's, as you put it, you can only go forward.
I mean, I acknowledge that in these specific examples, it's I think it's a coping mechanism, right?
Mm.
For whatever reason, you're not in a relationship, but you really, really want to be, and so you're going to look at peripheral things as to why you're not there, and it's it's easier to look outwards, to blame outward things, than it is to blame you, even if that is perhaps, even if perhaps one is justified in not blaming yourself, because let's be honest, the odds are not in favor of men en masse. But I can't help but think when I read some comments, even on specific subreddits where so much anger. I mean, it's got to be painful, right? That has to sort of eat away at you almost.
Sure.
So I can't help but think in those specific examples that perhaps the better option is indeed to look for a relationship, to say,
oftentimes, sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, go on.
No, oftentimes these guys can't find relationships. I've spent a lot of time recently talking about it's not exactly easy. I mean, you add on top of that, it's not exactly easy to find a relationship. And then the idea that you can pick and choose from the lot. This is not, going to the supermarket where they have, 5, 6, 7 different types of apples, and I guess I'll take the pink lady. Oh no, I'll take the Gala. I'll take the Brayburn. It just doesn't work that way. So it's not even. I mean, theoretically, sure, it might be, but for how many of these men that are filled with crimson-hued capsuled rage or anger, is it even possible to acquire that sort of thing? I'm not so sure, to be honest.
Yeah, that's a fair point
and
to make.
maybe the solution for these guys, hint, hint, is to check out Baldur's Gate 3, Cyberpunk 2077, and Vampire Bloodlines 2. These are 3 very good reasons to live without anger. Just saying. Well, I mean, these are, this is huge news for those of us who care. So it's highly consequential, too. But sure, I mean, maybe it would be, but how many women in those situations would be understanding and all this stuff? It's just too much work for them. Why that is for the women. Why bother when they're less angry individuals? So
because I mean, and not even related to relationships. I've got anger, right? Upbringing and all that.
You do a good job of hiding it. I don't think I've ever borne witness to it.
I'm not sure whether it's very healthy, but and that is actually the point I was going to make. I think long term, whether it's crimson-hued pill anger or any other
capsule, but yeah, capsule. That's fine.
Capsule.
Yeah.
I think it's important to let go of that, and in part of that is recognizing that women, for whatever you want to call them, for whatever you want to throw at them, they're just human beings.
Sure.
They've got their own goals, they've got their own whatever they're doing, and they are much in the same way men are controlled by their own nature. That doesn't mean you have to accept what they do to you. That doesn't mean you can't, put up walls or deal with it in whatever way you deal with it. But long term, actively seeking to let go of this anger and eventually finding a goal for yourself is pivotal. And that was actually the pro I'd sort of found together with the whole social setup is a degree of self-love. If you know that you can accept yourself and other people can reasonably accept you, and if you do that through a relationship, if that is your starting stone, if that's a stepping stone to get to where you want to, that I would see as a pro of a relationship. But again, I'm more of the habit of dissecting what is in a relationship. Can I get these things elsewhere? Can I get my social and emotional needs? Can I get them met elsewhere? And go from there.
Yeah. But I would subscribe to that too. But I think that the takeaway could just be that maybe each and every man should look at his own situation and consider whether or not it's worthwhile pursuing relationships. Look, I'm not going to tell men to do one thing or another. They want relationships, that's fine. I mean, I don't know a lot about it, but as far as I know, the late great Barbarossa's been in a relationship for quite some time. Long term seems to work for him, so why not?
If I remember correctly, he to his girlfriend, he just mentioned who he is, what he is. He essentially set up the whole frame of the borders of where to operate within, and that's that. As far as I know from one of his videos. Yeah,
that's been my impression. Don't know much, but that's certainly been my impression too. And if that works for him, that's fine. And if other men can do that or replicate that, and that in turn works for them as well, fine. But on the other hand, I think each and every man should have the option to weigh this stuff out and see whether or not it's worthwhile pursuing these things. Because you can certainly overvalue it, and I think it's very common in sort of the FA community, forever alone type of thing, where
relationships.
Yeah, well, this group of men who really are just looking. They see their salvation in the form of a relationship, and basically the idea that once they have that, then everything will be fine. Maybe it's even true for some of them, but discounting all the possible negatives and difficulties that arise with relationships. And I think that's something that they have not scrutinized or thought much about. And so I think it's up to each man to really consider whether or not, because it's not a given anyway. You still have to make an effort and invest time, energy, and money, frankly. Whether or not it's a good thing.
Yeah, to be fair, when approaching this talk, my point of view was to look at what a relationship has to offer, and then cut out things that you don't want, etc. And then you've got pros. But I never really thought of the other side and say that, or consider that there's a specific audience. Look, I'm a little bit older, but late 20s. I went back to university. Recently got a new job that pays a fair bit more while still being in university, and lo and behold, a lot more attention. Even though I never mentioned how much I make, this is
but part of that is you're a fine-looking devil. You're
that too.
You're a good-looking guy. That part of that is a lot of that is that you just don't. I mean, as you admit yourself, you just never react to all. Women have always paid attention to you. You just don't react to it much.
Yeah. What the point was, I did notice a difference, right? Some of them found out that I made more money than I did before. They became that much friendlier. I think it's then for specifically those type of men that see relationships as their salvation, come to face a reality that they may just be in that relationship a human doing and not a human being. Maybe it's important to then try it out and see what it feels like to be objectified as a walking wallet that way. Not jump in straight into the deep, get your feet wet beforehand, perhaps. But maybe it's a very strange oxymoron in a way. For somebody who's emotionally distant, it still hurts being considered a wallet on four legs.
Well, would it be any different if they set aside the wallet issue and they were just checking you out based on your looks and your rugged manliness?
Got me there.
I mean, they're going to be interested in you for some reason. Usually it's some combination of both. Oftentimes it's just looks. So
do we then ascribe looks to human doing or human being?
Well, that's complicated. Looks unfortunately are probably the essential part of any sort of relationship, attractiveness. Well, they are just what they are, so I guess it's human being. I mean, the whole concept of human doing that man-woman myth, I guess, created many years ago, that has more to do with social perception and social roles than anything else. I think that's a separate thing in some sense, since most of the women that are interested in you or have a passing interest in you, they're looking at you because you're again a good-looking guy, you're well built. You have hidden assets, so to speak. And
very subtle.
But the point is, sure. But when we think about men as human doings, it has a lot of implications. Role in society, why are most homeless men, these things, because even if the primary interest of women and men happens to be based on looks. It still would, there's another role to it, another element to it, and that, that's unavoidable. I think, that sort of utility factor. So, for example, you're in theory, and even though you're emotionally distant, as you put it, you're in with your studies and the new job and all these things, being very handy as you are. I mean, many women would kill to acquire you because not only are you a good-looking guy with many qualities. I mean, you can fix pretty much anything. Women love that, obviously.
Other than myself.
No,
I'm joking.
Well, you have been fixing yourself. I mean, you're on the righteous path of ascension. We can. You've definitely improved. We've talked about this many times, but it's self-improvement. Obviously, you haven't. It's not you're not married or in a relationship, but there's a big difference between where you are now and where you were years ago. But I think that, yeah, the human doing thing is just always going to be a thing. It's just what it, ultimately, the expectation that you're supposed to do something as a man. But sure, I think you could just, if someone's attracted to you because they find you attractive or you happen to be attractive, there's no problem with that. It is what it is. You might as well take advantage of your assets, I've always told you, by the way, to take advantage of your assets. Just saying. But but yeah, it's just one of those things. I think that's a good point you made earlier, that maybe just going through that experience is worth it. In the same sense of, I don't know, doing some kind of job that you're unsure about and you do it for 2 or 3 years, like, that's not really my thing. I'm going to move on. I won't do this sort of thing anymore. I was a teacher for a long time, relatively long time. I realized it wasn't my thing and moved on, I guess you could say. And so maybe you could look at relationships like that. Maybe it's worth dipping your feet into them. But on the other hand, if you're on a certain life trajectory or path and things are going reasonably well, and you find yourself appropriately challenged in a good way, and the stressors being thrown at you, or you feel sort of beneficial, that is, they lead to improvement, or again, self-improvement's another really trite, stupid thing people throw around, but you feel like you're just sort of moving forward. I can't see that perspective of why you would just end up in a relationship, because in as much as women do find you interesting in that situation, assuming the looks part is okay, it's because you are moving forward and you were for yourself, and she wants to, I'm going to try to be very charitable here, she wants to be part of that. She wants to receive some advantage from your progress, your movement forward. So, and the question is, what is she adding to that? Is she going to help you move forward, or is she just expecting things without adding something to your own? I guess in a sort of traditional situation, where the woman takes care of children at home, then yeah, it's no problem, because she's doing her thing and you're doing your thing. But in the more modern context, in our current year, it seems a bit questionable, especially if you're doing reasonably well. I mean, think about your own situation. Given all the things that you've achieved the last couple of years, I can't think of a single thing that what would a woman add to that? I mean, she would take up more time, okay, and because you have a busy schedule both at university and work. So what exactly is she going to add? She'll take up more time.
Yeah, no, at this point, for me, that was hardly ever the question. Even now with university, in the past, that moments in my life that were just too busy to think about it. And your sort of stress bucket is already full, so
yeah,
that was never an option. But what if your channel again, perhaps your or similar audience, you'll see a very polarized opinion, and one that's usually in a relatively harsh, as in don't do it because of these reasons. I think it was not what I expected from this talk to sort of make the point that perhaps just to get their feet wet would be an option, would be something they can attempt.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. Again, it's like trying out a type of a job that you've never done before, just to see what it's like, and maybe you don't like it, maybe you do like it. I mean, there's a separate issue of the availability of this job, in this case, relationships, but I think. Pardon me?
Not everyone can be a millionaire.
Yeah, not everyone can be a millionaire. Not everyone can be a Dutch stallion either, like some people here. But yeah, they're sure. I've never said don't do this at all. I think that the option should be available. Nobody should be prohibited. They should consider themselves free individuals to choose what they want to do. But all I'm trying to convey is my own perspective, which again has been colored by negative experiences. Maybe if I'd had just amazing experiences nonstop, I would think completely differently. And yet, for some reason, we're sitting down here. There's some sort of audience there, and there's almost a universality of you could call it confirmation bias, but a sort of observation that there's certain things that occur with interactions with women that are recurrent and happen frequently, and it just reminds me of how I first got into all of this now eons ago, wondering if I was the only one, the only guy. Because I used to run in very normie crowds, whatever that means, normal people who didn't really question things, and I was just puzzled at times at women's behavior, trying to think whether it was normal or not. And then I saw a lot of the negativity and negative discussion about men more broadly. And it seems to me that, in the context of the manosphere, obviously something is, I would say, brought us together. We're not together, but brought these people to a spot where all these observations, we're trying to make sense of certain observations that seem to be somewhat consistent, outside of a normative view, that where you cannot get that information, you can't get that type of discussion, etc., etc. With that said, the normative view is that you just try and relate. You should just pursue relationships de facto. You're offering a good alternative because, why not get your feet wet? But there's something about these recurrent behavioral patterns that just makes you, certainly me, want to question certain things, and a lot of other men out there, that is just never addressed in a normal situation. I mean, let's be honest. Outside of certain circles, to borrow a phrase of your countrymen, do normal is like just everyone just fucking do normal. I shouldn't be swearing. That video probably demonetized because of that. Who knows? But yeah, that's pretty much what it comes down to. And so sure, get your feet wet, but having an alternative perspective that you don't have to do something, that there are other options available, is not necessarily a bad thing. I think it should be weighed against everything.
Like I said at the start, if you can dissect what you get from a relationship and you see ways of getting this elsewhere, obviously try that first. If you're just missing social contacts, if you don't have a lot of friends, well, you know where to go. If it's purely about sex, well, there's other options.
Yeah.
But if you want those options as a second thing, but
yeah.
And as in regards to the normie thing, I mean, I'm still in university, and there's a bit of an age gap. Not so much. It's not that practical. Or at least I don't see massive differences between my fellow students. But what I have seen a lot is apprehension, especially from the younger guys, to get into relationships, and it's never sort of mentioned why, up until very promiscuous behavior by women or sometimes female students is portrayed, and then they'll be very vocal about the reasons why they're not looking for a relationship. So, I mean, it seems to be maybe this is just a bias from my point of view, because I see it on a regular basis. But perhaps there's some mild change going on. Perhaps it's like a pendulum that's swinging back and forth, and this is just one phase it's going through. But it's, I don't want to say refreshing, but interesting to see.
That young Dutch men are reluctant to, yeah, I suppose. Well, everything that happens in the United States takes a while to kind of sweep over to Europe, typically, but sure, I mean, it makes sense. There's a lot of apprehension in general.
Yeah.
And so, and there's a type of crisis situation, I guess, depending on how you look at it. So, yeah, I mean, things definitely are changing. And I think that's good in the sense that apprehensive or not, maybe these guys are just focusing on their own goals, and maybe they're doing their own thing, enjoying their own lives, doing their studies, trying to work on things that are interesting. Maybe they have better things to do than pursue relationships, like eating hagelslag op brood met boter.
Hey, joh, stroopwafels.
Stroopwafels, oh, yeah. So, maybe that's all. It's certainly less stressful. So maybe this is a new thing where guys are just gonna do their own thing, and come what may, maybe they'll find it really. But pursuing that as a primary thing seems almost like a Generation X thing, my generation, where you just really focused on relationships typically. Maybe it's because all the people I know, the younger guys I know, they're very goal oriented. They're just doing their own thing, and of course they're informed about these crimson-hued capsule matters in ways that others are not. And maybe these guys are to a certain extent too. It's hard to say, but yeah, it's probably overall a positive development. I don't think there really is a firm conclusion one can reach from all of this, but I would say that what you suggested, getting your feet wet might not be a bad idea if it's available.
Yeah, it might. That is an option. Again, it's going to depend on what country you're in, what common law marriages and what.
Oh, right.
See whether it's
if it gets to that point, that's not getting your feet. I mean, there's a difference in getting your feet wet at the swimming pool and then having a helicopter drop you off in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I mean, it's like a bit different there, right?
No, but isn't it the case in, I think it's Canada, where if she lives with you from a certain point, a certain amount of time, or even something very, very superficial, like she's got cleaning products there, then that's considered common law. I mean, if you've got those sort of obscene examples, obviously don't get your feet wet. Then I'd suggest rather looking, all right, where am I at in life? What are the things that hurt me? And try to resolve those if it's again a lack of social contact, because I think that's one of the biggest things, together with sex, frankly. That feeling of belonging to somebody, some group, someone, combined with sex is probably the biggest draw from relationships, at least in my point of view. I could be completely wrong.
Yeah, no, definitely. But again, I think it's okay, and I guess this is one of the take-home messages I'd like to put out there, is that it's okay to not be interested in that. It's okay to essentially be an outsider. I mean, we're both outsiders. Although you're a much cooler outsider than I am. That said, it's okay to just do your own thing. I think that's the one thing that, a lot of these younger guys stress out about. Well, just do your own thing. And sometimes you get busy enough that you're not going to even worry about these other issues. So, yeah.
Which would ironically even help you in relationships, judging your observation.
Waarschijnlijk, ja. Probably.
Dus zijn er nog verder dingen die je wilt bespreken? Are there things you...
Dat was alles.
Dat was alles.
Bijna alles.
So, when you suggested a talk, is this sort of what you thought you would get out of it? Like, get your feet wet, and especially in what
I was just thinking in discussing this. This was just a sort of spur of the moment discussion with just as the thoughts come to us, sort of thing. And I think it's we've managed to achieve that more or less. I don't know if the audience can get anything out of it necessarily, but I certainly hope so. And by the way, thanks for tuning in, audience. But I think there is a variety of perspectives. I mean, I think the one thing, if you do want to get your feet wet, that might be a good idea. So sort of check it out. But I think there's a value in observing other people and vicarious experience, and seeing that maybe that's not such a great idea because I see what's going on here or there. And honestly, if you're so busy in your life, you're so focused, or you really like what you're doing, to not get bogged down in all this relationship stuff, I don't really see why you should bother until it does bother you or you actually have thoughts on that. Um, and
As far as the observation is concerned, probably a point I should have mentioned earlier, observe women and how they interact with men that not necessarily they feel below them, but it's sort of a commodity. I mean, once you observe people in their, you know, natural habitat, you'll see that men are not treated by and large very well by women. That's just in a very casual way. I know it's a con and not a pro, as I've promised to give you, but if they're going to treat random strangers like that, imagine how they treat you, because that is part of my upbringing that went wrong, and lo and behold, my behavior in how I interact.
But I mean, again, I think you often have an overly negative view of what you've become, or I tend to have a more positive view of what you've become. I think it's ultimately a strength that you have, rather than some sort of weakness. And it certainly doesn't prevent you from achieving the things you want to achieve, and that's the most important thing. So I think that's the takeaway. Yep. We're all colored by our past and have our views, but anyway, everyone, thanks for joining us. I would, again, if you have not checked out any of the information regarding Baldur's Gate 3, Cyberpunk 2077, or Bloodlines 2, if maybe you're not a gamer, maybe though you could feel a little bit of titillation interest, even if you are not a gamer, but still, these are 3 good reasons to continue on with life and something to look forward to. And of course, sorry?
Stroopwafels.
Stroopwafels. Oh, yeah, those are Dutch. Well, they have them in Belgium too. They're kind of like almost a cake. It's basically just pure junk food and sugar, but it tastes really good. I think there's a difference between Belgian stroopwafels and Dutch ones, but I don't know the precise difference. Anyway,
I have no idea. I don't go there.
Lorien Studios, basically, also based in Ghent or in Ghent in Belgium. So,
yeah, you mentioned.
Yeah, hard to think too negatively of Belgium in light of that. So everyone, thanks for tuning in, and hopefully I'll check you out later. Final message: in order to keep this channel running, I'm going to have to varying degrees, use euphemisms, neologisms, and what have you, as I try to in this discussion, to not have my channel either, made to disappear, so to speak, or various demonization things. It's just, hopefully this will blow over, but it's really, we're at the stage now, as a friend of mine put it, where we're asked to do jumping jacks, but our legs have been cut off. So it's very difficult, and I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I still hope to have interesting videos and interesting and productive conversations, unconstrained, obviously, by inhibitions that are external. But it's going to be very difficult going forward, I suspect. But I'll do my best and try to stay true to the spirit of my being in the channel, all the while having to maintain some kind of observance of some of these new regulations, unfortunately. So, everyone, thanks for tuning in again, and I will check you out later. Dankjewel.
Tot ziens, laters.
Yeah. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.